Nutrition science, glucose regulation and utilization in the body. The process of digesting the carbohydrates in a slice of pizza through the gastrointestinal tract, ending the absorption of monosaccharides across the cells of the small intestine and into the bloodstream. From there, they travel to the liver, where fructose and galactose are converted from glucose after any meal containing carbohydrates. You experience a rise in blood glucose that can serve as fuel for cells around the body. But during the periods between meals, including while you're sleeping and exercising, your body needs fuel too. To ensure that you have enough glucose in your blood at any given time, your body has a finely tuned system to regulate your blood glucose concentration. This system allows you to store glucose when you have excess available, when your blood glucose is high, and to pull glucose out from your stores when needed, when your blood supply gets low. Your body's ability to maintain equilibrium or a steady state in your blood glucose concentration is called homeostasis. It's a critical part of normal physiology because if your blood glucose gets too low, called hypoglycemia, cellular function starts to fail, especially in the brain. If blood glucose gets too high, called hyperglycemia, it can cause damage to cells. Hormones involved in blood glucose regulation. Central to maintaining blood glucose homeostasis are two hormones, insulin and glucagon, both produced by the pancreas to release into the bloodstream in response to changes in blood glucose. Insulin is made by the beta cells of the pancreas and released when blood glucose is high. It causes cells around the body to take up glucose from the blood, resulting in lowering blood glucose concentrations. Glucagon is made by the alpha cells of the pancreas and released when blood glucose is low. It causes glycogen in the liver to break down, releasing glucose into the blood, resulting in raising blood glucose concentrations. Remember that glycogen is the storage form of glucose in animals. The image cells around the body have receptors for insulin on their cell membranes. Insulin fits into its receptors, kind of like a key in a lock, and through a series of reactions, triggers glucose transporters to open on the surface of the cell. Now, glucose can enter the cell, making it available to the cell to use, and at the same time lowering the concentration of glucose in the blood. If the cell needs energy right away, it can metabolize glucose through cellular respiration, producing ATP. If the cell doesn't need energy right away, glucose can be converted to other forms for storage. If it's a liver or muscle cell, it can be converted to glycogen. Alternatively, it can be converted to fat and stored in that form. In addition to its role in glucose uptake in cells, insulin also stimulates glycogen and fat synthesis as described above. It also stimulates protein synthesis. You can think of its role as signaling to the body that there's lots of energy around and it's time to use it and store it in other forms. On the other hand, when blood glucose falls, several things happen to restore homeostasis. You receive messages from your brain and nervous system that you should eat. Glucagon is released from the pancreas into the bloodstream. In liver cells, it stimulates the breakdown of glycogen, releasing glucose into the blood. In addition, glucagon stimulates a process called gluconeogenesis, in which new glucose is made from amino acids, the building blocks of protein, in the liver and kidneys, also contributing to raising blood glucose. How glucose provides energy. How exactly does glucose provide energy to the cell? 1. Glucose, a 6-carbon molecule, is broken down to 2 3-carbon molecules called pyruvate through a process called glycolysis. Pyruvate enters a mitochondria of the cell where it is converted to a molecule called acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA goes through a series of reactions called the Krebs Cycle. This cycle requires oxygen and produces carbon dioxide. It also produces several important high-energy electron carriers called NADH2 and FADH2. These high-energy electrons carriers go through the electron transport chain to produce ATP, or energy for the cell. Note that the figure also shows that glucose can be used to synthesize glycogen or fat if the cell already has enough energy. What happens when there isn't enough glucose? We've already talked about what happens when blood glucose fails. Glycogen is released, and that stimulates the breakdown of glycogen as well as the process of gluconeogenesis from amino acids. These are important mechanisms for maintaining blood glucose levels to fuel the brain when carbohydrate is limited. Hypoglycemia, or low blood glucose, can cause you to feel confused, shaky, and irritable because your brain doesn't have enough glucose. If it persists, it can cause seizures and eventually coma. So it's good we have these normal mechanisms to maintain blood glucose homeostasis. What happens if your carbohydrate supply is limited for a long time? This might happen if a person is fasting, starving, or consuming a very low carbohydrate diet. In this case, your glycogen supplies will become depleted within about 24 hours. How will you get enough glucose, especially for the brain and energy? You'll have to use the other 2 macronutrients in the following ways. Protein. You'll continue to use some amino acids to make glucose through gluconeogenesis, and others as a source of energy through acetyl-CoA. However, if a person is starving, they also won't have extra dietary protein. Therefore, they start breaking down body proteins, which will cause muscle wasting. Fat. You can break down fat as a source of energy, but you can't use it to make glucose. Fatty acids can be broken down to acetyl-CoA in the liver, but acetyl-CoA can't be converted to pyruvate and go through gluconeogenesis. It can go through the Krebs cycle to produce ATP, but if carbohydrate is limited, the Krebs cycle gets overwhelmed. In this case, acetyl-CoA is converted to compounds called ketones or ketone bodies. These can be exported to other cells in the body, especially brain and muscle cells. The brain can adapt to using ketones as an energy source in order to conserve protein and prevent muscle wasting. Ketone production is important because ketones can be used by tissues of the body as a source of energy during starvation or a low carbohydrate diet. Even the brain can adapt to using ketones as a source of fuel after about 3 days of starvation or very low carbohydrate diet. This also helps to preserve the protein in the muscles. Ketones can be excreted in urine, But if ketone production is very high, they begin to accumulate in the blood, a condition called ketosis. Symptoms of ketosis include sweet-smelling breath, dry mouth, and reduced appetite. People consuming a very low carbohydrate diet may be in ketosis, and in fact, this is a goal of the currently popular ketogenic diet. Ketones are acidic, so severe ketosis can cause the blood to become too acidic, a condition called ketoacidosis. This mainly happens with uncontrolled diabetes. Is following a ketogenic diet an effective way to lose weight? It can be, but the same can be said of any diet that severely restricts the types of foods that you're allowed to eat. Following a ketogenic diet means eating a high-fat diet with very little carbohydrate and moderate protein. This means eating lots of meat, fish, eggs, cheese, butter, oils, and low-carbohydrate vegetables, and eliminating grain products, beans, and even fruit. With so many fewer choices, you're likely to spend more time planning meals and less time mindlessly snacking. Being in ketosis also seems to reduce appetite, and it causes you to lose a lot of water weight initially. However, studies show that being in ketosis doesn't seem to increase fat burning or metabolic rate. There are also concerns that high levels of saturated fat in most ketogenic diets could increase risk of heart disease in the long term. Finally, it's a very difficult diet to maintain for most people, and reverting back to your previous dietary patterns usually means the weight will come back. The ketogenic diet is also very similar to the Atkins diet that was all the rage in the 1990s, and we tend to be skeptical of such fad diets, referring to focus instead on balance, moderation, and enjoyment of a wide variety of foods.